Of the many strange places I've covered on this channel, today's story is going to easily rank among the most genuinely unsettling. We're going to a forest in Transylvania where compasses spin without explanation, where visitors develop burns and rashes they didn't have before entering, and where at least one child vanished for 5 years, only to reappear in the exact same clothes, not looking a day older. Now, there is nothing graphic in this story, but the implications of what happened there are deeply disturbing. Deep in the heart of Romania, just a 30-minute drive from the city of Cluj-Napoca, there is a forest that local shepherds have refused to enter for generations. The forest covers roughly 250 hectares of dense woodland, and the trees there grow unlike trees anywhere else on Earth. Their trunks twist in clockwise spirals, their branches reach out at unnatural angles, and some appear charred on one side as if they'd been flash-burned by something invisible. The forest is called Hoia Baciu, and it was named after a shepherd who, according to local legend, walked into those twisted woods one day with his flock of 200 sheep and simply never came out. Not a single bone, not a tuft of wool, not a shepherd's crook was ever recovered. It was as if the earth itself had opened up and swallowed them whole. And so for centuries, the locals who lived nearby kept their distance, warning their children never to wander past the tree line. But in the 1950s, a 20-year-old biology student named Alexandru Sift became fascinated by the stories coming out of those woods. Sift was a serious academic, the kind of young man who believed that every mystery had a rational explanation waiting to be uncovered. And so he began making regular trips into Hoia Baciu, sometimes staying for hours at a time, documenting everything he observed. What he found there would consume the rest of his life. Sift reported that strange shadows seemed to follow him between the trees, shapes that moved when nothing else did. He documented unusual magnetic readings and fluctuations in light that his instruments could not explain. But most importantly, he photographed something hovering in the sky above the forest canopy, a disc-shaped object that he could not identify. By the early 1960s, Sift had accumulated an archive of photographs showing unexplained phenomena, and he had attracted the attention of other researchers who wanted to see the forest for themselves. Now, you need to understand something about Romania in the 1960s. The country was under strict communist rule, and the government had made it very clear that believing in anything paranormal, UFOs, ghosts, anything of that nature, was considered a sign of mental instability and a threat to the state. People who reported such things risked losing their jobs, their reputations, and sometimes their freedom. And so when a 45-year-old military technician named Emil Barnea decided to take his girlfriend, Zamfira Matea, age 34, on a picnic in Hoia Baciu on August 18, 1968, he had absolutely no reason to make up what he was about to see. In fact, he had every reason in the world to stay silent. But Emil Barnea was about to capture something on camera that would change the forest's reputation forever, and it would cost him nearly everything. On that August morning, Barnea and Matea arrived at a small clearing in the forest known as Poiana Rotunda, which translates to the round meadow. They were joined by 2 friends who would later refuse to be identified for fear of government retaliation. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, warm sun, not a cloud to be seen. They spread out a blanket and began to eat lunch, enjoying what seemed like a completely ordinary summer day. At exactly 1:23 in the afternoon, Barnea walked away from the group to gather firewood for a small campfire, and that's when he heard Zamfira calling his name with an urgency that made his blood run cold. He rushed back to the clearing and looked up to where she was pointing. There, hovering silently above the tree line, was a round, metallic object reflecting the afternoon sun. It made no sound whatsoever. Barnea would later describe it as looking like a disc or a saucer, perfectly smooth, with no visible propulsion system. And so naturally, Barnea immediately felt a sense of dread, because he understood that no aircraft in the Romanian military, or any military he knew of, could hover in place like that without making any noise at all. He grabbed his camera, a FED2 with a standard lens, and managed to snap several photographs as the object began to glow more intensely. And then, after approximately 2 minutes, the craft accelerated at an angle and disappeared into the atmosphere at a speed that seemed physically impossible. But that wasn't even the strangest part of what happened that day. Because when Barnea developed his photographs and showed them to a local physicist named Florin Gheorghita, the investigation that followed would uncover something far more disturbing than a single UFO sighting. Gheorghita immediately traveled to the forest to investigate. He had Barnea walk him through exactly what had happened, and he discovered something remarkable. The flight path that Barnea described matched perfectly with the sequence of photographs and the timing of each shot. There was no way Barnea could have faked the images unless he had somehow suspended a model craft in the sky, which was impossible given the backdrop of moving clouds visible in each frame. But as it would turn out, the UFO photographs were just the beginning. When Romanian ufologist Ion Hobana began his own investigation in 1968 and again in 1970, he confirmed that neither Barnea nor Matea had any knowledge of UFO phenomena before that day. In communist Romania, books about flying saucers simply weren't sold. These were ordinary people with no motive to fabricate a hoax, especially one that would destroy their lives. And that's exactly what happened to Emil Barnea. When his photographs were published in local newspapers, the communist government branded him mentally unstable, and he lost his job. In a country with no social safety net for the unemployed, this was devastating. But despite all of this evidence, despite the corroborating witness accounts and the analysis showing the photographs had not been tampered with, scientists still could not explain what was happening in Hoia Baciu. And the forest wasn't done revealing its secrets. The most unsettling discovery was the clearing itself, Poiana Rotunda. This near-perfect circle spans roughly 2,000 square meters, and within its boundaries, no trees grow. The grass inside the clearing remains at exactly the same height year-round. Researchers have taken countless soil samples, tested for radiation, analyzed the chemical composition of the earth, and found absolutely nothing that would prevent vegetation from growing there. The soil is identical to the rest of the forest, and yet nothing takes root in that circle. This would end up being the key that unlocked an even darker mystery. Because over the following decades, researchers documented something else happening to visitors who spent time in or near the clearing. People reported returning from the forest with unexplained burns on their skin. Others developed severe rashes, splitting headaches, and overwhelming nausea. Electronic devices would malfunction. Compasses would spin wildly. And perhaps most disturbingly, some visitors would experience what researchers called missing time. They would enter the forest, walk for what felt like an hour, and emerge to discover that 4 or 5 hours had passed. And then there were the disappearances. While the shepherd Baciu and his 200 sheep remain the most famous case, locals have documented numerous instances of people entering the forest and vanishing without a trace. But one case stands apart from all the others. And it's the one that suggests something in that forest operates beyond the laws of time as we understand them. It involved a 5-year-old girl who wandered into Hoia Baciu one afternoon and never came home. The search was extensive. Volunteers combed through the twisted trees for days, calling her name, looking for any sign of where she might have gone. But the forest offered nothing. No footprints, no torn fabric, no trace that a child had ever been there at all. Eventually, the search was called off. Her family was forced to accept that she was gone forever. And then, 5 years later, she walked out of the forest. According to multiple accounts passed down through the region, the girl emerged from the tree line wearing the exact same clothes she had been wearing the day she disappeared. The dress was not tattered, not worn. It looked as if she had been gone for only a few hours. And when her family rushed to embrace her, they realized something that made their blood run cold. She had not aged. She looked exactly as she had the day she vanished. A 5-year-old child trapped in time while the world around her had moved forward 5 years. When they asked her where she had been, she had no answer. She had no memory of those 5 years whatsoever. As far as she knew, she had simply walked into the forest and walked out again. Now, it's important to note that this account exists primarily in local folklore and has not been independently verified with documentation. But what makes it so unsettling is that it's not the only story of its kind. There are reports of a woman who disappeared from the forest with a 15th century coin in her pocket and reappeared sometime later with the same coin, as if no time had passed for her either. Alexandru Sift, the biologist who dedicated his life to studying the forest, continued his research until his death in 1993. Shortly after he passed away, his complete archive of photographs and research notes mysteriously vanished. The only surviving images were published by his friend Adrian Patrut, a chemistry professor who had worked alongside him. Whatever is happening in Hoia Baciu, someone or something doesn't want us to understand it. Today, Hoia Baciu remains one of the most studied paranormal locations in the world. Thousands of visitors enter the forest each year, some seeking thrills, others seeking answers. Many return with photographs showing unexplained orbs of light hovering between the twisted trees. Others report hearing disembodied voices, female whispers that seem to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The communist government that tried to silence Emil Barnea eventually fell in 1989. But Emil himself never saw his reputation restored before his death. His photographs remain some of the most analyzed UFO images ever taken. And deep in the heart of Transylvania, the trees continue to grow in their impossible spirals, reaching toward a clearing where nothing grows and where time itself seems to bend.